In Syria, government troops have reportedly managed to reclaim key areas of the northern province of Aleppo. Murad Gazdiev, our correspondent covering the Syria war, has visited the area many times and explains now the importance of the army's advance.
The Syrian government's latest operation in Aleppo has proven to be a success. After years of trying, they finally managed to break the sieges of Al-Zahra and Nubal, two pro-government villages which have been surrounded by Islamist rebels and Kurds to the west for years. The rebels here are mostly Islamists. Jabhat al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda in Syria has a tremendous presence in these parts. But there's also tremendous strategic value in holding on to this little corridor because they've effectively cut off Syrian rebels in the north of the country from the Azaz border crossing, from Turkey. It's through that border crossing that apparently many weapons, resources, supplies, even rebels, manpower were transported from Turkey into Syria. So in the coming days, we'll see whether the Syrian government manages to hold on to its gains.
The army's move has been condemned by several members of the Syrian opposition and also by US and French diplomats. This all comes, of course, with delegates gathered in Geneva for peace talks. However, the UN Special Envoy for Syria says those negotiations are temporarily on hold following a meeting with the Syrian opposition. Diana Tujikan asked the US State Department who's responsible for the suspension.
Well, the State Department said the Syria peace talks were paused, quote-unquote, in part because of Russia. But the spokesperson was so unclear on why else the talks in Geneva stalled that it created the impression that it was all Russia's fault. Take a listen.
These attacks run counter not only to the desires of the Syrian people who want to see this political process succeed, but also to the stated intentions of the Russians themselves.
So basically the breakdown or suspension in the Geneva talks is Russia's fault? Is that what you're saying?
I didn't say that. I said it was in part. Go back to what I said, Matt. Yeah. I said in part because of the disruptions to humanitarian aid and the continual attacks on civilian targets.
In part, what else is it due to?
Well, I wasn't privy to the discussions over there. I'd point you to what Mr. de Mistura said.
The UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura said the talks on the Syrian reconciliation in Geneva were put on hold due to the impossibility to address the humanitarian crisis, but it did not say it was Russia's fault. Here.
I am not referring to military activities. I'm saying to the impossibility through military activities and other reasons for the fact that the humanitarian signals which are meant to be sent to the Syrian people, for instance, lifting of the sieges, for instance, the access for all the places which are at the moment unreachable, should be seen.
The decision came as the Syrian government forces ended a 3.5-year siege of the Shiite towns of Nubal and Al-Zahra, that's north of Aleppo. The State Department said Russian airstrikes near Aleppo primarily targeted opposition groups and not Daesh. I tried to get specifics here. Did these moderate opposition groups reach out to the U.S. and say that they were under attack by Russia?
I don't know that they reached out and said that they were under attack. We have lots of streams of information that would confirm that fact for us.
Which groups were under attack
As I said to Saeed, I don't have the list of every group.
We're getting mixed signals from the U.S. moving forward with the talks. So on the one hand, saying military action should not be a precondition to the peace talks. On the other, saying military action by the Syrian government and Russia is the reason why peace talks stalled, which makes it more likely for the Syrian opposition to walk away from the talks. They're already under a lot of pressure from their backers in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey to do so.
Some British lawmakers share Washington's position on the break in the Geneva talks, something that also comes as little surprise to some of the experts we spoke to.
Russia cannot continue to sit at the table as a sponsor of the political process and at the same time be bombing the civilian areas of the very groups of people that we believe will form the backbone of the new Syria once Assad has left.
Blaming the Russians is just a red herring on this thing. The peace talks fell apart basically because all the parties that were involved were not really interested in peace. They're more interested in war. I think that under present conditions, what it would require is that the United States begin to pressure its allies who have been trying to undermine these talks, who have been responsible for the violence more than anybody else in that region, that they have to come to a situation where they also are prepared to talk peace and to compromise. That we're not at that point yet. I hope we get to it, but I'm, if optimistic, very cautiously optimistic.
The US is reportedly rebuilding an abandoned airbase in Hasaka province in northeast Syria. There's no official confirmation from Washington, but there is mounting evidence apparently showing that reconstruction is ongoing. Even the US media is reporting that the base exists.
An airstrip in remote parts of northern Syria is being refurbished and extended. Kurdish officials in the area say it's for the use of the U.S. military.
A military airfield just 100 miles from ISIS positions. Satellite photos show the work that has been done.
Reports suggest that work at the airbase started in October. Its legality is now being called into question because Damascus never gave permission for the reconstruction. More from Murat Gazdiev now, who was the first to report about the base 2 weeks ago.
This territory is controlled by Syrian Kurds, the YPG, and it took us a while to find out the details. We approached senior YPG officials here in Hasaka province to comment on this matter. At first they feigned ignorance. They said, what base? This is the first time we hear of it. But as we talked, eventually they somewhat reluctantly and indirectly perhaps admitted that there is an airbase.
The US Defense Department denies any reconstruction is ongoing and says the press reports are wrong. However, its spokesman did tell us that US forces in Syria are continually looking for ways to improve logistics, personnel, recovery and support. The senior editor of Executive Intelligence Review magazine says the American military recognizes the strategic importance of having a base there.
There have been U.S. Special Forces on the ground for quite some time. You can go back to early last year in the battle to liberate Kobani, and there were clearly U.S. advisors and on-the-ground special forces and spotters. The Defense Secretary Carter has openly acknowledged that small contingents from the Joint Special Operations Command are on the ground there, and that airbase that they're trying to revive is in that Kurdish region. Having that kind of a base in that Kurdish region is something that's highly desirable, even though there is only a very limited basis in international law for that U.S. presence being there.
President Obama's attempt to reassure America's Muslim communities failed to gain much support online. We'll tell you all about that and more after the break.